everyone, it's Jennifer from Flux. In this video, I'm going to teach you how to crochet this beautiful Hearts of Flutter scarf. This is made with some cluster V stitches and looks like a series of hearts across our work. We have ended our scarf with some lovely fringe in the same colors as our scarf, and we did some alternating, like a deep raspberry and sort of like a light orchid pink color. So this is going to be easy to make. If you're not familiar with the cluster V stitch, I'm going to show you how to make it every stitch of the way. You can just follow right along with me. And if you're not familiar with fringe, we're going to go through and make some fringe together at the end of the video. Our finished scarf is about 7.5 inches wide. And our scarf length, minus the fringe, not including the fringe, is 55 inches long. Now, the fringe on either side is about 6.5 inches, so 13 inches in total. So that gives it a total, including the fringe, of 68 inches, okay? So we're going to learn in this video, this is made lengthwise, which means we're going to make a chain that's the length of the scarf and work upwards, okay? So we are going to determine the length of the scarf by our chain multiple, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then the width of the scarf is determined by how many rows of the pattern that you work, okay? So you can really adjust this. You can make this wide, very wide, and make a shawl. You can make it just a little bit wider if you want it to be a warmer scarf. And the length, if you want it to be longer or shorter, you're just going to work within those chain multiples at the beginning when you start to kind of scale it to what you need it to be, okay? So let's get started. This project, you'll need a pair of scissors, a tapestry needle. We're going to be using a pretty big tapestry needle for this to weave in our ends because we're going to be using some thick yarn. We're also going to be using a 6.5 millimeter K crochet hook. This is my Furls Streamline, the wood, and I'll put the link down below if you'd like to get one for yourself as well. We're also going to be using this beautiful yarn. Let's talk about this. Now I picked some pretty colors because our scarf has a theme of hearts. I picked some pinks and some kind of this like raspberry magenta color. We're going to be using 436 yards of this. This is a, on the yarn weight scale, it's a number 5 bulky weight yarn. And we're going to be using, like I said, 436 yards of this. Now I'm going to be using 2 colors. And if you're making one of these scarves for yourself, I would recommend using 2 or more colors for this because the cluster V little hearts that we're going to make are going to be, using contrasting colors and stripes will show it off the best, okay? So I have 2 colors here, but feel free to use more than 2 colors, but at least 2 for best results. So I have 2 balls of this. This is color number 52. This is called dark magenta. And then I have 2 balls of this color number 56 is called pink petunia. And the yarn is called Amigo Chunky by Hobie. Now I've used this for some other projects. If you hop on over to the blog, I made my Cloud 9 scarf with this. You might actually recognize this is the pink that I used in it. But check out that scarf too. This is a wonderful yarn. It comes in tons of colors, and I'll put the link down below for this yarn as well if you'd like to get some for yourself. Now, if you look at the yarn label for this yarn, it does recommend the K crochet hook, which we're going to be using. Now, if you need to substitute yarn, just look for a yarn that recommends this K crochet hook and that is a 5 bulky on the yarn weight scale, and you'll be just fine. Okay, we're going to start with one of the colors. Now, like I mentioned before, we're going to alternate colors. So we're going to do 1 row of pink, 1 row of the magenta, 1 row of the pink, 1 row of the magenta, and so forth, because that will really show off our little hearts we're trying to make the best possible way, okay? So start with any color you like. And what we're going to do is we're going to put a slip knot on our hook. Now, we are going to start with a multiple of 120 chains. This is a multiple of 3. So any groups of 3 to make the length that you need will work just fine. That way you can scale it to however you want. So our chain of 120 is going to determine the length of our scarf. I like to follow a general rule of thumb where I go from the hip, go around the back of the neck and to the other hip, just to give me a rough idea of how long I want it to be. Now, everybody is different heights and has different torso length, so you know you might need to vary it up a little bit, But if you follow that multiple of 3, you'll be just fine. If you're not familiar with multiples, all that means is when you're doing your starting chain, you just go 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 and so forth until you get the length that you want. When you do your starting chain, before you start stitching, just kind of throw your chain around your neck or measure it with a measuring tape if it's for someone else, just to make sure you have the rough length of your scarf that you want, okay? So what we're going to do, like I mentioned before, we're going to do a starting chain of 120. So let's put a slip knot on our hook. Wrap the yarn around your fingers to make a loop, bring the yarn behind the loop, reach in with your hook, bring up that loop and tighten. We're just going to have a little tail here to start. Next, what we want to do is chain 120, like I mentioned. So to make a chain, wrap the yarn around the hook and bring it through the loop. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 20. So here is our starting chain. And like I mentioned before, just kind of throw it around your neck or measure it just to see you're roughly getting about the length of the scarf that you want. I'm happy with this length. We're going to keep going. If you need to adjust, again, remember it's a multiple of 3, okay? So for row 1, we're going to work in the 5th chain from the hook. So let me just come in a little closer. This loop here on our hook does not count. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So this 5th chain from our hook. And what we're going to do is we're going to wrap the yarn around the hook. We're going to make our first cluster V of the round, okay? So wrap the yarn around the hook, insert it into that chain, and bring up a loop. You're going to have 3 loops on the hook. We're going to go nice and slow at first in case you need to learn how to do this stitch. So you're going to have 3 loops on the hook. Then we're going to wrap the yarn around the hook, bring it through the first 2 loops on our hook. We'll have 2 loops on the hook now. Wrap the yarn around the hook, bring up another loop. So wrap the yarn around the hook, bring up a loop. 4 loops are on our hook. Wrap the yarn around the hook and bring it through the first 2 loops on the hook. Now we have 3 loops on the hook. Next, we're going to wrap the yarn around the hook and bring it through all 3 loops. Okay, half of our cluster for our cluster V stitch is complete. Next, we're going to chain 2, 1, 2. Because we're making a V, this will push both of those, one leg this way and one leg that way. Then we're going to work the other half of our cluster V. So what you want to do for that is right in that same chain, we're going to stay in that same chain. We're going to wrap the yarn around the hook, insert the hook into that same chain and bring up a loop. You'll have 3 loops on the hook. Wrap yarn around the hook, bring it through the first 2 loops. 2 loops are now on your hook. Wrap yarn around hook, go back into the same chain and bring up a loop. You'll now have 4 loops on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the first 2 loops. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through all 3 loops. And now our first cluster V is complete. Now it looks very much like, if you're familiar with the V stitch, it's sort of like the V stitch, but a little bit more substantial and like chunky and lofty, okay? So this is our first one. Now let's move on to the next one. So what we want to do is we want to skip 2 chains, 1, 2, and in that next chain, we're going to work our next cluster V. So we're going to wrap the yarn around the hook, insert it into that chain, and bring up a loop. 3 loops are on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the first 2 loops of your hook. You'll have 2 loops on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, insert it back into that same chain and bring up a loop. You're going to have 4 loops on the hook this time. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the first 2 loops. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through all 3 loops left, okay? Then chain 2, and then we're going to work the other half of it, okay? So wrap yarn around hook and insert into that same chain and bring up a loop. 3 loops are on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the first 2 loops on the hook. 2 loops are on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, insert it back into that same chain and bring up a loop. We'll have 4 loops on our hook this time. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the first 2 loops. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through all 3 loops. And we've just finished our second cluster V. All right, let's do a couple more of these together and then we'll kind of go off on our own and work on the rest of the row, okay? But let's do like 2 more together just to get a feel for it. Now we're going to pick up a little bit more speed. If you don't feel like you're ready to pick up enough speed yet, you can always go back in the video, and there's also, and rewatch things, there's also a slow motion feature in YouTube that you can utilize to kind of slow things down if you need to keep it going slow. But we've done 2, so let's pick up a little bit more speed. Okay, just to review, we're going to skip 2 chains, and in the chain after that, we're going to wrap yarn around hook, insert our hook into that chain and bring up a loop. You'll have 3 loops. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the first 2 loops. Wrap yarn around hook, insert it back into the same chain and bring up a loop. You'll have 4 loops on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the first 2 loops. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through all 3 loops left on your hook. And then the first half is done. Chain 2. And now back into that same chain. Wrap yarn around hook, insert it into that chain and bring up a loop. 3 loops are on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the first 2 loops. Wrap yarn around hook, insert it back into the same chain and bring up a loop. You'll have 4 loops on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the first 2 loops. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through all 3 loops on your hook. And then our next cluster V stitch is complete. Now, these kind of just look like blobby V's right now, but after we put in another row, we're going to sort of stack them. They're going to start to take on more of a heart shape, okay? All right, let's do one more together, and then we'll kind of go off on our own and finish the row. Skip 2 chains, and in the chain after that, we're going to wrap yarn around hook, insert the hook into the chain, bring up a loop. 3 loops are on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the first 2 loops. Wrap yarn around hook, go back into that chain, bring up a loop. You'll have 4 loops on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the first 2 loops. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through all 3 loops. Let's work on part 2 of our V. So chain 2, wrap yarn around hook, go back into that same chain and bring up a loop. You'll have 3 loops on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the first 2 loops. 2 loops are on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through, or go back into that same chain, bring up a loop. You'll have 4 loops on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the first 2 loops. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through all 3 loops, okay? So we've done a couple of our cluster V's together. It's looking very nice. It's very squishy looking. We're gonna work through just repeating what we've been doing for the whole rest of our chain. Now, once we get almost to the end, I'm going to show you how to finish up row 1, and then we're going to do something really exciting. We're going to switch colors, go to our magenta color, our contrasting color, and we're going to put another row in, and I'm going to show you how to do that. It's very similar to what we're doing now, but we're going to put begin our next row, and it's really going to start coming to life with the contrast of the stitches, okay? So keep going the same exact way we've been doing it with our stitches so far. Keep going all the way across, and once we get towards the end of this row, we'll rejoin, and I'm going to show you how to go from row 1 to row 2, switch colors, and how to do row 2, okay? Okay, we're coming up to the end of the row. We just have a few chains left. So we want to skip the next 2 chains, and in the chain after that, we'll work our last cluster V. So we've been doing this all the way across the row here, and we're just going to do that very last one, and we'll do the other part of it. I'm just going through this part pretty quick because we've done this already. And then you should have just 1 chain left. So in that very last chain, you're just going to work a double crochet. To make a double crochet, wrap the yarn around the hook, insert the hook into that last chain and bring up a loop, 3 loops on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the first 2 loops, wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the last 2 loops. Okay, so let's look at our row. We have some beautiful cluster V's all the way across, and our scarf is a nice length. Again, we're working this lengthwise, okay? If you don't like working scarves lengthwise, you could always just make it narrow and work upward, okay? I forgot to mention that before, but you could always do that as an alternative. So let's zoom out just a little bit because we're gonna switch colors and cut our yarn. So we're gonna switch from this light pink to this magenta next, and I'm just going to cut my yarn, leaving a little tail. We're not going to worry about the tails right now. Wrap the yarn around the hook and bring it through the loop to fasten off, okay? Now, what we want to do is we're going to grab our yarn. Now, I'm going to just show you something really quick. What I like to do when I'm using yarn like this is to slip the label off for a minute, And we're going to, this is the outer strand here, and we're just going to wrap this around like this and tuck that in because we're going to try and do a center pull. Okay, now you don't have to do this. I know for some people it's not very fun to try to find the end here, but what I do is I kind of smush it in like this and then put both fingers in there and sort of like reach around so you can find the very middle. It won't be the exact middle. You'll probably pull a clump out like this, but you'll find the end if you dig around enough. You might have a bigger blob than me, but you'll use it up pretty quickly, especially with this stitch. Okay, so we have our next color and we've established our center pull ball of yarn, okay? All right, so what we want to do now is we're going to go, remember that double crochet we did at the end of the row? And I'm going to come way back in so you can see up close here. We're going to go back into that same stitch with our hook. So locate that stitch at the top, right where you fastened off. And then we're going to take our new yarn and we're going to hook it on there. And we're going to pull it through, okay? This is where this pattern really comes alive because we're going to start to see some color play here. So just tie the new yarn right on. Now, as a side note, there's lots of different ways to join new yarn. If you have a way you prefer, that's fine. I just like to cut it off and tie it right on there when I switch colors, okay? So what we want to do is kind of get all these tails out of the way. We're going to deal with these later. Grab your new yarn that's connected to your yarn ball, and then you're going to go back into that same stitch, bring up a loop, and then we're ready to begin row 2. Row 2 is really easy because we're just going to be working into the center of these V's. Remember those chain 2s we did? They created a nice little opening. We're going to be working into those openings, okay? So to begin row 2 though, we want to chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and then we're going to turn our work. Okay, so just flip it right over. And then, like I mentioned before, we're going to go into that in the written pattern on the blog. The link is down below. It's called the chain 2 space. We're going to be working into that space created by that chain 2. Okay, so we're going to go right into that space. So we're going to work a cluster V right into this cluster V. Okay, so wrap the yarn around the hook, insert the hook into that chain 2 space, and bring up a loop. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the first 2 loops. Wrap yarn around hook, go back into that chain 2 space and bring up a loop, 4 loops. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the first 2 loops. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through all 3 loops. Then we're going to chain 2. 1, 2, and then back into that same chain 2 space. See how it's starting to stack? Wrap yarn around hook, insert it back into the same chain 2 space, bring up a loop. 3 loops on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the first 2 loops. Wrap yarn around hook, go back down into that chain 2 space and bring up a loop. You'll have 4 loops on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the first 2 loops. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through all 3 loops. And now we have 2 cluster V's stacked on top of one another. Let's do one more and then we're going to kind of go through the row on our own, okay? So wrap yarn around hook, insert it into that next cluster V, that chain 2 space, and bring up a loop. Wrap yarn around hook, bring through the first 2 loops. Wrap yarn around hook, go back into that chain 2 space and bring up a loop. 4 loops are on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the first 2 loops. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through all 3 loops. And then I have a little tangle there. There we go. Okay, that's the first half. Chain 2 and then work the second half. Yarn around hook, bring up a loop. Yarn around hook, bring through the first 2 loops. Yarn around hook, go into that chain 2 space, bring up a loop. Yarn around hook, bring it through the first 2 loops. Yarn around hook, bring it through all 3 loops. Okay, so we're just going to do this all the way across. You can see it's starting to look really pretty. So keep going across, and when we rejoin, we're going to learn how to finish up row 2. Row 2 is actually the row that you'll work on for the rest of the scarf, okay? So once we finish row 2, you'll know exactly what to do for the rest of the project. So I'm going to go through and work row 2. When we get towards the end, we'll rejoin in just a minute. Okay, coming up to the end of row 2, we're just working our very last cluster V. And I'm just going to kind of zip through it because we've done all this already. And then we are going to do the second half. And then here we are at the end. Now, you have a turning chain here, And we're going to go into that topmost chain of our turning chain right here. And we're going to work a double crochet into that topmost chain of the turning chain, just like that, okay? To finish up the row. Okay, so let's look at our progress. We have some beautiful colors happening, some nice interplay of our two shades that we've chosen. And so now what we want to do is just keep repeating row 2 over and over until our scarf, this is going to be the width of our scarf. So until our scarf is as wide as we would like it to be, or until we run out of yarn, whatever comes first, okay? So keep repeating row 2, alternating colors for every row to get the maximum color contrast. And then we'll rejoin in just a minute, and we're going to kind of finish up our scarf and see, how far we've come with our width and look at the full spectrum of our two colors play out. So keep going with row 2 and we'll rejoin in just a minute. Okay, I'm just coming up to the end of the row here. This is our last row, just working that very last cluster V. And then I'm going to work a double crochet in that topmost chain of our turning chain. Same thing we've been doing. Just like that. And then we can cut the yarn. I have just, mine's already cut. We can fasten that off, wrap the yarn around the hook and just bring it through that loop. And I'm really liking the width of this. I do have a little bit more yarn left, so you could either keep going and making your scarf wider. I really like the width of this, how it stands right now. But if you have a little bit of leftover yarn and you're happy with the width like I am, we're going to add a little bit of fringe on here, okay? This is completely optional, and you can obviously leave it and just weave the ends in here, but we're going to add some nice fringe onto our scarf. Now, I just wanted to show you before we move on, I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rows of this for my scarf. I did 1, 2, 3, 4 of the lighter pink and 4 of the darker pink. Okay, just as a side note, if you want to get the same look that I have here. Obviously, you can keep going and keep making it wider and wider. Now, fringe is super easy to do if you're not familiar. Let's grab the ends of our scarf here. Now, I have some ends already from joining on new yarn, and we're going to kind of keep those intact for right now and add some fringe where the ends are. And hopefully they'll blend in and we don't have to weave as many ends in, okay? So you'll need your hook and a pair of scissors and then any yarn that you had left over. So let's start here on the end. So we're gonna grab our dark pink because we have a little end here, and I'm gonna pull about 12 inches long. Now you can use a ruler or just kind of eyeball it. It's totally up to you. So pull about 12 inches out. Now take your finger and just kind of fold it and pull another till it gets to the edge of where that one is. And then we're going to cut the yarn. And then you're going to take that piece of yarn that you just made and put your finger like in the middle of it and just kind of like loop it around your index finger. And I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so you can see better. Now take your hook, go into that last stitch here, and we're going to just hook the yarn on and bring it through that stitch, okay? Then what we're going to do is we're going to take these loops that we have here and that end, we're going to incorporate it. And you're going to send it through and just pull it nice and tight, okay? And there we have our first fringe. Now it has loops. We're going to trim everything all nice and neat at the end, okay? So grab your next yarn color, which is this pinky orchid color, and we're going to pull about 12 inches. We're going to do this a couple times together so you can get a feel for it. Now this yarn ball is just about gone, so it's getting kind of tangly, but it's okay. We're going to do the best we can here. We're going to pull about 12 inches of yarn. You can just eyeball it like I am. Fold it in half, pull another 12 inches, and then cut. Now hook it around your finger in the middle, and we're going to take our hook and we're going to go into one of these side. Now these are turning chains, so really we're going into some chains here. And you're going to hook the yarn on. Now you may notice I'm leaving a gap here. We're just going to incorporate the ends first, and then we'll go back in and sort of fill in. But I want to make sure we take care of our ends. This is like a really fun way to deal with ends. So you're going to pull up a loop, and then you're going to put your fingers through it. Now take the tail and the loops that you just made, and you're just going to pull it all through like that, okay? Now, again, there will be a little gap here. We can always go in and fill that in later. We'll see how it looks, okay? All right, let's do one more and then we're gonna kind of depart and work on this on our own. So grab the next color, which is the dark pink, pull about 12 inches out, fold it in half, 12 more inches, and give it a snip. Hook it around your finger, making a loop in the middle there, and then go into any one of these side chains, these turning chains that we created. And you're going to take and hook your loops in. You can do this with your fingers too. I just find it, for me personally, it's easier with a hook. Grab that tail, and we're going to send the tail and those loops through that loop that we made, okay? And it just kind of works that in all by itself, okay? I'm going to just straighten up that other fringe. And these are spacing quite nicely, but we can always go back in and fill it in, okay? And I do like how when you come to the end of the row, it just sort of like punctuates it with that lovely fringe, okay? So we'll just kind of work in that manner. Okay, we're at the light pink. So we're just going to kind of go off and work on this on our own. Again, pulling 12 inches about, fold it in half, another 12 inches. Hook it around your finger, and then just kind of go into one of those turning chains with your hook. Hook it, hook those loops, bring it through, and then incorporate that tail as well. Send it through the loops and tighten, okay? Let's keep going across and then we'll rejoin in just a minute and you can see what we've done and we'll give it a little bit of a haircut too. Okay, now I feel like we need to add one more here at the end. I don't have a tail, so in this case, you would just not worry about the tail. Just pull your 12 inches, fold it in half, 12 more inches, and you would just send it through, not worrying about the tail, more so about the positioning of where it is, okay? So we're just going to put it right there at the end and then just pull it through, okay? So just keep working across, and then when you're done, we've worked all the way across here, we're going to hop over to the other end of our scarf and work that. You can see how much the fringe adds to it, okay? So keep working across, then hop on over to the other end of your scarf and we'll rejoin in just a minute. Okay, all of our fringe has been added. Now, I wanted to point out something. When you do fringe, there's like two different looks. There's this kind of knot, or if you flip it over, if you like this, kind of makes like a horizontal wrap on the other side. So you can kind of decide what side you like best. I'm going to flip these back over because what we want to do now is just kind of comb our fringe down, straighten it out, and we're going to give it a nice trim across. Now, line your scarf up so that the two sides are about the same. Now, what I usually do is find the shortest piece, which is probably going to be this one. And I'm just going to cut this loop so I can get a better sense. So I'm going to make my fringe about this long, okay? It doesn't have to be exact. Now, some people like to tape it down and use like a rotary cutter and get a nice clean cut. You can do that, totally fine. I'm just going to give it a cut with my scissors, okay? So we're just going to go across and just go nice and neat. And it helps to have a larger pair of scissors like mine and a pair that have some sharpness to them, okay? But we're just cutting it straight across, and we want to comb it down, make sure there's no long pieces. If you find one, that's fine. Just give it a little snip, and we'll move those crumbs aside. And then we're just going to do the same thing on the other side, okay? So we can just give it a snip across. Now, if you have a short piece like this, and you're okay with it, you can just leave it as is. If it really bothers you, you can take a needle and weave it up into your work if you don't like it, because we did use some of our ends. So it's up to, that part's up to you as well, okay? So just give your fringe a nice clean cut across, and I'm just eyeballing mine. You can use a ruler and get it really exact if you want to, but once you kind of straighten it out and use it and wear it like this. Like I'm kind of like shaking it out. It's just going to kind of like blend together. Okay. So our beautiful Hearts of Flutter scarf is complete. It looks wonderful. It has lots of texture, and these cluster V's give it a ton of warmth. So that is how you crochet the Hearts of Flutter scarf. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure and click the subscribe button to get all the latest Fiber Flux YouTube video updates. Thanks again.